Hey guys, it's Chris with Drop Dice, codename Little Drop, since I look like I've lost 10 years here, or Drop Junior, from what I got from the comment section last time. So, what we're talking about this week for world building is a topic that I was introduced to a new channel this week, tabletop or tabletop Nights Entertainment. There we go. There's a lot of channels that have tabletop in them, and sometimes you get a little confused. But anyways, tabletop Nights Entertainment. They originally were talking about a video that they talked about dice and how they're relevant to the hobby and what makes, like, things like our superstitions about dice, how they're involved in the gaming world and stuff like that. Well, that video was interesting enough to get me to kind of click their channel, but the one that really got my interest was actually a different video that they did where they talked about player-driven worlds versus story-driven worlds. Now, they did an excellent job of that. I'm going to kind of give you a brief condensed version, and then I'm going to talk about how you can implement that in your world building. So basically, fundamentally, there's a couple minor differences between these two GMing styles, and it's something that I have been doing fluidly without really thinking about it. And watching their channel kind of gave me terms for it. So if you build a story much the way that a movie is done, where there's like a main character and then other characters play support characters, and then maybe you rotate that role of main character as you go through, a good example is the Provokers. The Provokers, it focuses on stories of each person, and they each kind of take turns in the limelight, and their character has this scene that matters and means something to them, and then, like, once that scene's over, they kind of shift gears and it becomes someone else's story for a little while. That's kind of a player driven world. That's the kind of world that I generally like to do. And one of the things that you find out about player driven worlds is a lot of the stuff you have a basic understanding coming in, but you discover it as your character discovers it. And that's how player driven works, is a lot of it is on the onus of the player to have more direct interaction with the world. You're not really spoon feeding them things. They kind of are discovering them as they go through things, not just, rattle off some history. Now, world driven game worlds are a little bit different. Instead, the world doesn't care necessarily about your heroes. It's more about the overarching story. And I think this is really how one of the differences between new school and old school RPGs is actually this playstyle difference almost. Because in old school RPGs, stuff that I like to play sometimes, your characters matter for the story, but they don't matter per se by themselves. So, like, if you died in a story, you died for the greater good. You did something to help, bring about a greater sense of accomplishment for the whole group. It was a team effort. If you died, you died valiantly. It was part of it. Like, even if you died stupidly in a trap, there was probably some accomplishments that you did that were towards this whole greater good picture. And new school gaming has more this idea that, my heroes are almost godlike. They're going to make it. They're going to defy the odds. They're going to push on. And so you have games that have the same players that go from or player characters that go from level 1 to level 20 in D&D terms, or maybe they play in a 3-year campaign with the same characters in something like Fate or something like that. And I think that's where a little bit of the difference comes in with old school and new school. Now, there's other differences by far, but I think that play style is one of those differences, which I appreciate both. In fact, the way that I've designed Stratmere is I feel like it's a world-driven story. Like, the world really evolves things. Now, a good example from the tabletop one-shot group of the world defining things and evolving things, I would actually say, is like the Copper Jackals. You have the setup where there's this faction and you know what's going on, but there's overall story, stuff like an adventure path could also be considered like a world-driven one. One of the ones that they mentioned is Call of Cthulhu. I think Call of Cthulhu is a great example. Essentially, the story will continue even if your character cannot, for whatever reason, because Call of Cthulhu, death isn't always the worst thing that can happen to you. And so when I built Stratmere, I think I had the idea that it was more world-driven. Like, the world doesn't doesn't really care. You know, you're not going to be generally not going to be, you know, the six eternal beacons of light kind of story. It's more you're going to play in it, you're going to have a fun time, but maybe the story is a little bit smaller in scope. It's not going to be epic, is kind of the term that I usually use. Whereas a world that is player driven, or a player driven story, would be a little bit more targeted towards that. You know, we're the six candles of light fighting the eternal darkness. Lord of the Rings would be a great example. And I think both have their merits. It's more about what you feel like playing, and I kind of balance between the two, to be honest. I think Providence, when I finish getting it put together, is going to be leaned a little bit more towards player driven, because I want a game that's discovery, but not or not entirely discovery of the worlds that are in Providence, because it's a sci-fi setting, but more internal discovery as well as external discovery. So I think that if you want that aspect, you want to play up the discovery, I think that a player-driven story kind of caters to that aspect of the game, doing discovery through that interaction, kind of having a almost authentic way of going about discovery. Whereas if you do a world-driven story, it's more like the facts are laid out there, and it's like, okay, there's war happening. Did you find out why? No, it's cool. War's still happening. I think of the world-driven story kind of like the real world almost. It's a matter of fact. It doesn't really care who you are. It's going to do what it does. And that's really great, actually, for like epic games where you want to have like large-scale games where, you know, you do a lot, but ultimately what you've done is like another drop in the bucket. Like the best example of one that I can think of using that example of the like world driven and still having epic in it is Greyhawk, or even Ravenloft. Ravenloft's probably a better example. So Ravenloft, you're awesome. You defeat the vampires, you free this small town, and 2 days after your character dies, a new vampire moves in. Ultimately, everything you did does have lasting effects, but the terms of those lasting effects are much shorter. I think in a world-driven game, consequences come up more often, and those acts of good are not necessarily as impactful as they are in a player-driven game. I think that's where the main difference between the two are. So I've already made a vow that I'm going to try and keep these short. I'm going to stop it right there. I'd like to see what your guys' opinion are. If you do get a chance, check out Tabletop Nights Entertainment, who I'm going to put a card up in one of the corners. I always forget which one. To their channel, specifically to that video, I should say. Be sure you give them, as well as me, a thumbs up, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. They're a brand new channel. I think I was number 8 to subscribe to them, so make sure you guys send them some love as well. As always, guys, thanks for tuning in, and I will see you at the gaming table.